Chapter 15. The average Dakota woman did not indulge in confessions or confidences with other women, or in minute analysis regarding her married life. She did not share any intimate secrets of that life, or her reactions to it, whether pleasant or unpleasant. She could live and die with her own secrets, and she did so. Her one concern was to maintain her dignity. She would not make it possible for other women to ridicule her or accuse her of lack of reticence on that point, however agreeable or upsetting her marriage might be. She managed a calm exterior, a convincing matter-of-factness about it that prevented others, including her husband, from guessing her feelings. If her married life was obnoxious to her, she simply walked out of it without a word as to why. If pressed, she might say, "It was not agreeable to me." That being so, and her reason was clear and sufficient. There was no economic need for her to endure in silence. She knew that her brothers and male cousins were ready to provide for her, and her own relatives to take her back into their midst. She did not have to hang on just to be supported by a husband. Nor was there any need to flaunt her married state. Why should she? Since there was no peculiar triumph where the premise was man in pursuit, woman overcome. Thus, presumably, she had not landed him. He had landed her. Yet let the man gloat, if gloating there was to be. A woman who acted important because she was married was something of a fool, and incurred ridicule rather than aroused admiration or envy. Almost any woman could marry somebody, and marriage for women was the rule. There was no peculiar distinction in it, that one married woman should play it up. Back of it all was kinship reason for a wife's reticence. No matter with whom she exchanged confidences, whatever she told about her husband's intimacy with her would eventually reach his woman's relatives, particularly his sisters and cousins, and they would bitterly resent his being publicly discussed in an undignified light. They could not forgive a stupid wife who thus made their brother or cousin appear ridiculous or worse. It was the kinship duty of these womenfolk of his to uphold his honor and to defend him in all phases of his life. And since every woman had brothers and cousins to defend, they all held the same attitude in this matter. Thus kinship once again wielded a controlling force here, in muzzling all idle talk about marital intimacy involving Pacific personalities. Growing up in a milieu where their ideals had habits obtained, Waterlily could not help but reflect them in her own marriage, nor had it been enough that she absorbed them from her surroundings unconsciously. Her mother must hammer them in, also, with perhaps 2 positive strokes. "When you marry, my daughter, remember that your children are more important than you. Always the new life comes first. Your duty to your children must be in accordance to this rule. Next, it is your duty to honor and respect your husband, and to keep your life with him a secret always. A woman who talks about her relations with her husband is disloyal to her mate and a reproach to herself. Accept your new life as a mature woman, even while you are gentle and yielding. Do not behave in a childish manner towards your husband. You are his helpmeet, not his baby. Be a grown-up. Watch your actions and attitude towards your husband's relatives. If you make crude mistakes, they will think you ignorant of kinship matters, and will be sorry their son married you. Be respectful, honor them by avoiding them, and in all your dealings with your relatives of marriage, hold back a little at first. Keep your reserve at all times. Be composed, be wise." Waterlily had followed her mother's advice almost without qualification. It was her privilege and duty to be bashful and prudent in adjusting to her new situation as a wife and relative-in-law. That was proper for the young bride, even though it was bound to take time to feel at home with her husband and to break down her habitual silence. The husband who understood this and was willing to wait patiently, and who did not try to draw her out prematurely by tricks, was indeed a wise man. It paid him in the end. All the same, it was the beginning to dawn on Sacred Horse that his wife was being unduly slow, unduly quiet. He could not tell what she was thinking, even while her behavior was all that he could ask. Misgivings began to assail him. Could it be that she was naturally a glum person? Or that she regretted her marriage to him? Did he not please her as she pleased him? Would she never snap out of it and feel fully at home with him? Finally, he went to consult his cousin, a man of more years and more experience than himself. I am troubled, my cousin. She hardly ever speaks unless I start the conversation. She talks along well enough then, but what troubles me is that she never begins, and she always stops first. She seems afraid to talk freely. Why, you'd be surprised at the mute life we live together. Then hopelessly he added, if it is always going to be so, how can we have a good life? In giving advice, men usually thought a while first. But at last the cousin said, it is always harder for a newlywed couple to get used to each other within the man's tashbaye. You made your first mistake in not staying for a while with her family, where she would have only you to adjust to. Then, when she knew you well, she would be better able to meet the problem of in-laws by herself. I say this out of my own experience. At first I stayed with my wife's tashbaye, or I was the one to act in a bashful manner, not she. It was easy enough for me to stay out of the way, and she was still surrounded by her familiar relatives. That made it easy for us to start our life together. It did not take her long to get used to me, since I alone was a stranger. He made another observation. If your wife is still reserved towards you, do not be alarmed. Consider that she was bought. A woman who hastily jumps into marriage by eloping must needs go all out to get acquainted with her husband. She can hardly affect bashfulness after her bold step. One who marries by mutual agreement needs only to meet her husband halfway. But the one who is bought, well, a man must expect to go all the way. He must do all his wooing after marriage. But don't worry, my cousin, you are still a boy, and have no knowledge of woman's nature. When there is a child, it will all work out. Shy women always find their tongue fast enough then. Just let a baby lie helpless in their arms, crying for nourishment, and then, without a thought as to who might be looking, they forget themselves, driven by their single desire to soothe it. Then they pour out a steady flow of tender words into the infant's ear, and soon they have the habit of talking. Just wait and see. All that Sacred Horse had told his cousin about Waterlily was true. He could count on the fingers of one hand the times so far that she had talked spontaneously and at any encouraging lift. And those rare times were very precious to him. Memorable was the day he killed an antelope and brought it home already skinned. After unloading it outside the teepee, he came in, ate the food she had ready for him, and then laid down flat on his back, on the opposite side of the teepee from her. Ah, it is good to stretch out, he groaned contentedly, while he watched her from the corner of his eye. She only smiled a little flicker of a smile as she lowered her eyes on her work and said nothing. He tried again. Now, if someone were to remove my damp moccasins, wipe my throbbing feet, and paint the soles of them red with ceremonial red paint, that would be perfect. After a weary day, to be made a beloved in that way. He saw her start to smile, with a spark of interest in her eyes, and then quickly bit her lip and looked down, a silent little woman in her woman's space. He had not really expected her to paint his feet. Not yet. That was another custom for seasoned couples who had learned to esteem one another from a long mutual kindliness through the years. It was no routine requirement for a wife, any more than dressing a wife's hair was a routine for a husband. A man did not ask for his feet to be soothed and honored. It was an unsolicited and spontaneous sign of wifely affection and appreciation. Sacred Horse knew that they were both too young in years and too new in their marriage for that. He only said it as a joke, because it would be for them such an incredulous performance. After a long interval he broke the silence. I don't suppose you know what that is. One sees it so seldom, and it is for couples much older than we." He gave up then, and rolled over toward the teepee wall for a nap. "She'd never talk," he gasped. But for once Waterlily did talk, softly reminiscing. "I do know what it is. My mother has done it. One time I especially remember, she did it after a long hard day, when hunting was very poor and everyone was anxious. We were all miserable with hunger. Both Smiling One and Ohia were crying for food, and my mother was very unhappy. But she called us in and said, 'Children, probably your father will have to return without any meat again today. All the animals have vanished together, by agreement it seems. We may have to fill up on more mashed tispila, prairie turnips, again tonight. Here we will get home. He will get home worn out after trying hard to find food for us. So, what do you say we paint his feet and but pretty new moccasins on him?' We forgot our hunger and got busy. Everyone helped. Mother got the water ready, while Ohia went over the prairie, gathering fresh sage plants and soft, fragrant kind, with tender, velvety leaves, for her to wipe my father's feet dry and cool them at the same time. I took down the paint bag from the teepee pole where it always hung and opened it as carefully as I could, because the paint was in powdered form. I spread it out so that it would be ready to use. My little sister, Smiling One, she was only 3 then, sat holding the new moccasins. When it came time, she surrendered them one at a time, so very solemnly that it was funny. Waterlily laughed indulgently, forgetting herself. When my father came in, he staggered from loss of sleep. He was limp from fatigue. When we painted his feet, he said nothing, only he moaned a little. But we knew he was happy, and he had brought meat at last too. He had walked to the big hills on the horizon to find it, and had carried a large deer on his back all the way home. But what pleased him most was that even before we knew he was bringing food to us, we had been planning to make him our beloved by putting red paint ceremonially on him. I remember too. But there she stopped short. The long speech had so astonished her suddenly that she could not go on. It was at such times, when in a nostalgic mood, that she could forget her new status momentarily and talk freely and charmingly. I have to see to the meat. So, murmuring an excuse for leaving abruptly, she slipped outside. Sacred Heart went to sleep, hopeful of some headway. He woke up only when she peered at him at the entrance and asked, "What have you done with the hide?" "I left it at Twin Oak," he said. "I thought you ought to rest this once from dressing hides day after day. It is too much for you. You can afford to lose one skin now and then." "You ought not to have done that. You ought to always to bring in everything that can be of use. It is no hardship dressing hides. I am used to it. Besides, we always need good buckskin for clothing and other things." Her words were a rebuke, but under them also was happiness that he had contrived to spare her. All the same, she could not leave the precious hide out there. While he slept on, she bridled her pony and rode swiftly off, without speaking of her intention to anyone. When Sacred Horse got up and missed her, he hurried out to the Twin Oak, guessing that was where she had gone. She had pulled down the slippery hide from the high fork where the oak became twins, into which Sacred Horse had flung it. But she was having difficulty in holding it in place while she tied it to her pony. Green hides were always a slimy dead weight. This one kept sliding off as fast as she had it in place. Just when she was ready to give up, her husband came to her aid. By the time they were ready to go back, it was dusk. The ride homeward was cool and pleasant. After a little while, they raced their ponies. Sacred Horse held his in check at first to give her a head start, so as not to leave her too far behind. He need not have done that. Soon it was not altogether easy for him to gain on her. How that girl could ride, he had no idea. Her long black hair, which had come unbraided during her struggles with the hide, trailed behind her in a level sweep. Her pretty young face was tilted up, and she was actually laughing, free as the wind, when he came up beside her. They slowed down and walked their ponies the rest of the way. Twilight had by then deepened into dark night, lit only by some bright stars that seemed just beyond reach. She talked a great deal now, mostly about her home and her childhood. She always talked more easily after dark, Sacred Horse thought to himself. Then she was very nice with him. It was several days after that the Sacred Horse came in one afternoon and found Waterlily all ready to go someplace. Her hair was oiled to a gloss and neatly braided, and a fine line of vermilion paint marked the part. Some of the red was over her face, too. She was wearing a pretty gown, one of the several that her talented aunt Dream Woman had made for her. Outside the entrance were 3 kettles of food, hot off the open-air fire. "Well, what's all this for?" Sacred Horse asked genially, sitting down outside the teepee to eat. "Are we giving a feast?" "No," Waterlily said. "It is only something I prepared for our mother across the circle. She is giving a feast for the new grandchild's ear-piercing tomorrow. I don't know how to get these kettles over there," she added. "I thought you might think of some way." He said nothing, but after watering his horses, he brought back a strong pole of ash and ran it through the bales of the kettle. When Waterlily was ready, she grasped one end and he the other, and thus they walked along, sharing the weight evenly, the kettles hanging between them on the pole. The mother was delighted, even though there was plenty of food already, part of which had come from the local relatives. This that Waterlily had done was so right socially that it made the mother very proud. In the shrill high voice in which women exulted, she exclaimed in cries of delighted surprise, "Hina, Hinan, Hinan. Do come and see what my daughter has done. The honors the grandchild to be named tomorrow." Then she ran to the teepee a few paces off where the infant lay asleep, and looked in at the entrance, informing it for the benefit of the adults within hearing. "See what your grandmother has done for you. She brings food for your feast. Oh, you lucky baby, to have such a pretty young grandmother who cares so much for you." Everyone was impressed with Waterlily's gesture. How well she does in kinship for one so young, they said. Fortunate is the man whose wife does things well. And indeed, Waterlily's initiating a deed like this so early was remarkable. Yet it was the sort of thing her people did, and she knew nothing else. Bluebird, for instance, was forever carrying courtesy food to this or that one, or inviting visitors to eat at her teepee, or helping friends and kinsmen about to give a feast by contributing food and other gifts, or comforting the bereaved with a meal and words of condolence. Every act of kinship responsibility put also a social pleasure. The daughter had only done what she knew her mother would do in her place, and it was admirably right. Waterlily had been over here often since she first met her social parents. By happy coincidence, they were already social parents of Sacred Horse too. So that together, husband and wife, Sacred Horse, and Waterlily were son and daughter to Ridley's parents. This made a very congenial group, free of restraints and of the need for formal behavior. Both Sacred Horse and Waterlily could be perfectly natural and relaxed before their social parents. It was a fortuitous situation, and not unusual. Basking in the home-like atmosphere, Waterlily soon joking and laughing gaily when the four sat inside the teepee that evening. She even forgot that her husband, a comparative stranger yet, was present, and her usual diffidence vanished. He watched her with concealed delight. So this was her nature, when she was completely at ease. How charming she was that way. Why, there were instances when she even argued with him, and once she actually flashed a bit of petulance his way, like a spoiled child. She had spirit. She was human, all right. However, had she managed to keep passive and overly polite all this time? Now if she would only forget to crawl back into her shell like a turtle, where she could not be reached, when they were away from here again and alone together. It occurred to him then that this was the place for them to come often. This might well be the sort of shortcut to the end of her bridal shyness. Maybe after all, he would not have to wait until there was a child for her to lose herself. And so they sat that evening, content and happy, with no suspicion of the sinister threat hanging over the whole camp circle that very night, soon to fall upon them, scattering its frightened people to the four winds. They sat visiting until a casual caller who dropped in later on gave them a hint of the approaching horror, and even then no one recognized it. The dog barked a warning, and a man outside called, "Do you sit there?" "Yes, come in," said Ridley's father. Men replied to men, women to women. The woman of the teepee was saying, "Let me see. Oh yes, there is plenty of stew left," tilting her kettle to look. He never wants much late at night, just a snack. While the husband was saying, "That's Yakutan, the camp circle crier. You know, he is our friend. He always drops in to see us at this time." Husband and wife spoke simultaneously. Waterlily caught both remarks. She and Sacred Horse had been sitting side by side in the honor place, but now the men and women formed into distinct groups according to sex. People always tended to do this unconsciously. Waterlily eased over toward the mother and Sacred Horse toward the father. Yakutan joined the men on the left side of the teepee. All the conversation was interesting, for Yakutan was an entertaining talker, and in addition he had a prodigious memory for details. Having just come from the council teepee, the forum and the center of all discussion activities, he knew all the latest news. Presently he was talking about the beautiful blankets woven in many colored bands, which the two sons of Buffalo Boy had recently brought home from the Arapaho country. They were much in demand as wraps, and were especially adaptable for summer, because they were lighter in weight than skin robes. These that the boys had brought home were the talk of the whole camp, and every woman thought covetously of them. Yakutan explained that the Arapaho scouts had found them in great bundles, where they had been dropped by an army passing over the territory southwest of them. When the blankets were brought into the Arapaho camp, there was a mad scramble for them. "You may be sure," Yakutan said, "and no wonder, for they are very fine." "How many did Buffalo Boy's sons bring back?" Ridley's mother asked. 20 odd, I imagine. He could have gotten even more, the boy said, but a bad sickness was raging, and men and women and children were dying fast all around, and he did not want to die there, so he hurried away. "And they were right," the father commented quietly. "Home and the place to die, unless it be the battlefield." The two women shuddered, uttering the woman's explicative of fear and horror. "Yeah." And then the mother asked, "What kind of sickness?" "Did they say?" "Yes, they said it was many sores, smallpox. Something like the sickness that killed off whole families over a generation ago in some camp circles." The mother shuddered again. "Yeah, it does seem that there are coming to be worse and worse sicknesses in the land. Time was when such things were unknown." But woman-like, her mind was really on the blankets all the while. She said, "How I wish my grandchild might be wrapped in one of those new robes at her ear-piercing rites. Just long enough, during the feast, when the naming takes place. Then I should want the baby to give the blanket away to the old who pierces her ears. It would be a worthy gift for the first giveaway. I have wanted her ears pierced," she mused. "My grandchildren shall all wear ear ornaments, as children beloved. I have often said aloud, none shall go through life with slippery, smooth earlobes, like a tray, without relatives to honor them." Waterlily asked, "But is the old man really going to cut a hole in the baby's ear? Poor little thing, to be shedding blood and crying from the pain. I could not bear for her to cry, even though it means an honor." The father commented, "My daughter is right. I could not bear it either. Bloodshed is bad enough for adults, even when they cause it for themselves. No, the child will not actually be pierced. She will not have to cry. The ear piercer will simply hold the blade to the earlobes in token. Later, when she is a little bigger, we shall keep clamping tighter and tighter about them. Some of that soft metal that my friend Lean White Man gave me before I left. He meant lead. A band of lead with sharpened ends was used to force a hole for earrings in that manner. At the mention of the white man, Waterlily remarked in a low voice intended for only her mother, "I have seen only a very few white men in all my life. Where I live there was none. The few I saw were when we visited the camp circle of my father's fellowhood friend Pawnee. Oh, how their cold blue eyes frightened me." The father overheard her. "Daughter, you cannot tell about white men any more than you can tell about Dakotas. Singingly here and there, white men are very good. Take Lean White Man now. There's a friend for you. I have none better. No, not even among the Dakotas. And that's a strong statement, since they are my relatives." His wife cut in, taunting him. "I suppose you and he are in fellowhood. I suppose you would die to save him. Would he die to save you?" But to this he turned a deaf ear. Elderly couples often bandied words in this vein, neither taking the other seriously. Yet the habit had its uses too, in that it tended to help them keep each other in check. If the husband was going too far, the wife cut in and set him right, and vice versa. Everyone understood this habit of the long time married and often found it amusing. Over such triflings, they all sat talking pleasantly, until someone spoke of the murder that had taken place the day before. Dakotas killing one another was a peculiar, dreadful thing. When one did so, it threw the entire camp circle into a state of horror and apprehension. The reason for the recent killing was understandable in a way, yet nobody could say it was a worthy one. The village harriet, named Everywhere, had promised faithfully to marry two different men, Red Lake and Cedar. When she finally married Red Lake, Cedar was so angry that he swore to get them both. But he had killed only the husband. The woman was still in hiding somewhere, and so having killed his rival, he then swore to kill Everywhere too. Yakutan was saying, "I hope he finds her soon. The woman of the teepee murdered viciously. It is her kind that bring trouble to good men and women, and set a wrong example for our girls." Waterlily was thinking of Nightwalker, a comparable character back home, who was the object of derision and the despair of women. "Well, so Red Lake is dead, and all because of a brazen woman," the father remarked. To this Yakutan asked in surprise, "Why, my friend, have you not heard the rest? Cedar, too, is now dead. A cousin of Red Lake has slain him in reprisal. It happened late today. I suppose everyone knew by now." "That is even worse," the father said. "Ah, well, at least it is all over. The score has been quickly evened up. Cedar had it coming for him, killing a man. Whatever the provocation, it is never great enough to justify a Dakota taking the life of a fellow Dakota. Since he cannot return what he has taken, he can only exchange his own for it. And that Cedar was now done." Yankton agreed. "Indeed so. It is now cleared, as they have decided at the council teepee." Nobody spoke for a while, too amazed at the enormity of the thing to comment further. And then the man of the teepee sighed a long, deep sigh and began filling his pipe with the tobacco and kinksnick blend dexterously from habit, without watching what he was doing. One of his hands were concerned. His mind was on far-off things. Looking straight ahead, he soliloquized thus: "So it is all settled and done with. Let it be. It is enough. Now 2 lives have been destroyed, the one for the other. Let us forget the nasty business and try again. It ought never to have happened among men of the universal kinship of humans. Let us have peace once more." Sometime during the evening the boy Red Leaf had returned, entering unobtrusively and had settled down back of his understanding mother, and she seemingly unaware of his arrival, had nevertheless slipped some food before him, and then let him be. There, comfortable in the protecting shadow that she cast, he ate quietly. Mothers had a way with their adolescent boys that was just right. They never drew attention to them or embarrassed them in any way. When Redleaf had finished, he had maneuvered himself toward the men's group and was listening there back of his father. At last he spoke up. Yes, but will it end there? A puzzled look was on his face. What if now a cousin of Cedar were to kill the cousin of Red Lake? And what if the kinsman of the cousin of Red Lake were to kill the cousin of Cedar? What I mean is, since everyone has kinsmen to avenge them, they could continue killing each other back and forth until everyone was dead. Oh, son, what dreadful things to say. His mother pretended to be greatly horrified. But there is some truth in what the boy says, Youngton spoke up. Of course, it likely would never get entirely out of hand. Unfortunately, there are always bound to be mild-tempered men, poor haters, who can never get angry enough to kill. We could rely on them to stop it at some point. But a chain of killings, at least for a time, is not impossible. No doubt it was to prevent such a thing that our forefathers devised the ordeals for trying murders in ancient times, thereby put the matter up to the Great Spirit for judgment. And since humans may not dispute the Wakan wholly, the result of the ordeal was accepted as final. The two men recalled the kinds of ordeals, one in which the guilty man was called on to ride a wild horse without falling off, and the other one in which he had to jump high hurdles without knocking them down. Either form was used as magistrate's discretion. It was not a trial to determine if the man was actually guilty. That was already admitted and generally known. Rather, it was a judgment on him, if he was intended to die. He failed in the ordeal. He was meant to live. He miraculously survived. My friend, there is still that other way to deal with a murderer, which, to my mind, is the noblest of all, because it brings the best results, Yankton remarked. I wonder if you are familiar with the kinship appeal. Yes, my friend, I am, though I have never witnessed it. I have heard those who have speak of it with high respect, the father answered. But tell the children here, I think our people have never devised anything loftier than that. So Yankton described how he once saw the kinship appeal used to settle a score. The enraged young relatives of the slain man debated the kind of punishment they ought to mete out to the slayer, who was still at large. And as they debated, their eldest relative, a man of great influence in the entire tribe, sat listening as though in accord with them. After they had all talked themselves out, he began to speak. With consummate skill, he gave them the impression that he was going along with them all the way. My kindred cousins, brothers, sons, and nephews all, today we have been made to sweep without shame, men though we are. Someone has dared to do us an injury in slaying our young relative. Has he not thereby grossly insulted our family pride and our honor? Our kinsman was young. He too loved life. He was not ready to die, yet he is dead. Should we not vow that his slayer too shall die? And should we not go out forthwith and kill him? Very well then, why do we sit talking here? Why not give the murderer his due at once? He smoked quietly after this, calm and steady. In due time he resumed speaking. But now he had changed his tack. And yet, he repeated, and yet, my kindred, there is a better way. That the fire of hate may not burn on in his heart or in ours, we shall take that better way. Go now to your homes, look over your possessions, and bring here the things you most prize, a horse, say, or weapons, or wearing apparel, or a blanket. Easy ways and empty words may do for others. We are men of another make, so let us take the harder way, the better way. If but few are able to do that, then let us be of that few. The gifts you bring shall go to the murderer, for a token of our sincerity and our purpose. Though he has hurt us, We shall make him something to us a relative, in place of the ones who is not here. Was the dead your brother? Then this man shall be your brother, or your uncle, or your cousin. As for me, the dead was my nephew. Therefore his slayer shall be my nephew, and from now on he shall be one of us. We shall regard him as though he were our dead kinsman returned to us. Yankton and his host smoked a while. Then he said, "My friend, that was a tremendous proposal. Would you not say?" "Indeed it was," his host agreed. And what assurance of leadership that elder kinsman must have had, to dare suggest such a thing, for it required of each man to undergo inner battle within himself, and to master his pride and anger first. This is not easy. I take it they all did so. Yes, they accepted what their elder kinsman said, because they saw it was right. They saw it was easy enough to fight violence with violence. Killing was the work of a moment. But to take the murderer as a relative, after what he had done, and to live in sincerity and creative goodwill with him, day in and day out to the end of life, that was something else. You may well imagine how proud must have been the spirit of the slain youth to see his relatives doing the harder thing. Now on the appointed day, the slayer was brought to the council tepee. He was brave. He did not try to run away. He knew he had killed a man and was ready to pay with his life. Even so, not knowing his exact fate, he entered with his eyes averted, steeling himself for the worst. He did not try to infer the decision from the council's men's faces. He did not want them to take pity on him. He would not have men say, supposing him to be afraid, "Poor fellow," like some hunted animal he tried to detect mercy in men's eyes. The spokesman said, offering him the pipe of peace, "Smoke with these your new kinsmen seated here, for they have chosen to take you to themselves in a place of one who is not here." Hearing these words, the man was visibly unnerved, and he began to tremble. "It is their desire that henceforth you shall go in and out among them without fear, by these presents which they have brought here for you. They would have you know that whatever love and compassion they had for him is now yours, forever." As he said these words, tears began to course down the slayer's cheeks. You see, he had been neatly trapped by loving kinship, and you may be sure that he proved himself an even better kinsman than many who had right of birth, because the price of his redemption had come so high. Then Yankton added, "I know this well. I was one of the youngest and most enraged of the cousins of the slain man. But I learned then that there is no more powerful agent for ensuring goodwill and smothering flames of hate than the kinship of humans." Waterlily and Sacred Horse and the rest sat very still after this. It was too tremendous. There were no words for it. The men smoked mechanically on in silence, and the women sat with lowered heads, waiting for someone to speak first. Finally, in an almost everyday manner that broke the spell, the woman of the tepee threw some light sticks on the fire, and then it flared up. She once more tilted her black three-legged pot to the light and peered in. "Let me see. Yes, there is some food remaining. I'll just heat it up quickly. These chilly autumn evenings, it is good to swallow something hot before going to bed." And as she busied herself in a practical way, everyone shifted a little and came back to the present. They ate the food while talking of inconsequential matters, until a woman's shrill cry broke out somewhere. "Alas, someone else has died." Yankton's words were ominous. That afternoon, a baby died across the way, too. I wonder who this time. Redleaf had been lying on his stomach, with elbows planted and chin nestling in cupped hands. Now he added his bit of news. "There's a whole family down sick over that way," he said, and raised his chin momentarily to indicate the direction. "So many deaths, so much sickness." Waterlily sighed, thinking of her grandfather far away. It was long past midnight when she and Sacred Horse walked homeward, hand in hand in the dark. They were both sobered by the sorrowful atmosphere that pervaded the entire circle, by the wailing that started up here and there as the news spread. It was a portentous sound. Anything could happen on the morrow. Waterlily sat in her teepee doing fancy work. 2 days ago her husband had taken some horses that his father had promised sometime during the summer to a relative in a distant camp circle. He had left before sunrise the day after their visit from the social parents across the circle. His elder sister Echo could be heard just outside. "No, no, daughter, you may not go along. Stay here with your aunt. I shall be back soon." Then she looked in at Waterlily. "Sister-in-law, I am going to a teepee yonder where a kinswoman has just died. Your little niece Robin will stay. I do not like to take her to a death because she always screams so, whenever I wail trying to help me." "Of course," Waterlily answered. The little Robin came inside and stood there, pouting her lips and frowning to keep back the tears. Then all of a sudden, apparently having conquered herself, she went limp where she stood and crumpled to the floor, all joints giving away at once. When finally settled, she was in perfect sitting position as became her sex, with both legs flexed towards the right, a prim little copy of the women about her. Already at 4 years of age, it was habit. Before Waterlily could think how to interest her in something, other mothers had come with their little ones and turned them in. They too were going to the deaf. "Sister, this one will sit with you. Now you mind your mother. If she does not mind, sister, tell me when I return." "Cousin, I am leaving my youngest. He hears well. The little thing, he will be no trouble. Just tell him to be still. He hears very well." She meant he was quick to obey. Thus before long, Waterlily had 8 small children on her hands, while their mothers went off to wail over the dead. She had no trouble in keeping them happy. Actually, they managed themselves, playing quietly at various pastimes. At the start, they were politely aware of her and stopped every time she glanced at them to explain in full detail what they were playing. But after a while, they forgot her and went into their activities in earnest, leaving Waterlily to work uninterrupted. At noon, she fed them all, and they sat around the outdoor fire. In the afternoon, she took them for a walk to the woods. They found many tree mushrooms that stuck out from the trunks or branches like immense white ears. It was because of this that they were called tree ears. The tree ears were box elder and cottonwood were especially preferred, in that order. So succulent and flavorsome were they when cooked with dried buffalo meat. The children pried them off with poles and let them fall, unbroken and, if possible, into the blanket that Waterlily held below to catch them. When the little party reached home late in the day, they found the mothers back, cooking for their families around the outdoor fires, red-eyed and weary. The women sighed and sniffed eloquently now and then. Otherwise they refrained from needless conversation, as became their mood after weeping over the dead. Only the senior wife, Tatla, was articulate. "So many deaths lately, so many that I must wail again and again until my eyes are dimmed. My head, too, how it throbs." She commenced binding her head tightly with a strip of doeskin, but she was not complaining. The truth was that she took a certain pride in fulfilling all her kinship and social duties well, down to commemorating the bereaved and wailing for the dead, for the good woman had a reputation to uphold. She never missed a death, no matter how humble the one who has died, how good she is. Humans should care for each other so, and should take time to honor one's passing. Oh, may great crowds throng her teepee when it comes her time to go. It is as she deserves, people often said of her. She was not going to let them down. Instead of one death, there had been several, and the woman had gone about wailing from one to another. Oh yes, I know I overdid today. After 3 places I was coming home to rest, but then I passed a teepee where a strange young man lay unmourned. I had to stop and wail over him too. I always say that while I live, no human being shall go out in utter stillness like an animal," the senior wife declared, lying down after binding her head. The fact was that the epidemic was spreading, and the new blankets, which the sons of Buffalo Boy had brought home, were infested with deadly germs, against which the people had no immunity. Through giveaways and also as a simple courtesy gifts, those blankets had been changing owners and carrying smallpox from teepee to teepee. The people, however, did not connect the sudden series of deaths with the new blankets, and at the same time they were frightened by the disease. They welcomed the carriers of it. Good Hunter returned from the council teepee and went straight to his daughter Echo. Waterlily, who owed him avoidance respect, slipped quietly into her own teepee when she saw him coming, so as not to hamper him in what he might have to say to Echo. But teepee walls being only skin deep, she could not help overhearing him, for Echo's home was next to hers. "Daughter, too many people are dying too fast," he said. "It is now plain to the council that the matter is grave and likely to grow worse. Once before, this same many-sore sickness visited other camp circles, and many people died of it. So before any of our group gets it, you must leave and stay in the wilds until it is safe for you to return. That way you can escape the sickness. Stay somewhere along Buzzard Creek. I will send for you when it is right." "Of course, father, since you say so," Echo replied. "Tell my son-in-law to have the horses ready so that you can leave at dawn. Take your sister-in-law with you, and your mother also. Already she has partly sickened herself from wailing so much. It will be best for her to get away. Take what you will need of food and clothing, but travel light. Luckily there is always plenty of game along the Buzzard. In the hills on either side there are deer. When your brother returns, I will send him out to you. He and his brother-in-laws will get all the food you need until this danger passes." Through all of this, Echo kept up a wordless lullaby to her infant in her arms, whistling it between her teeth, as women did to put a baby to sleep. But she was also considering the matter. She asked, "And what of the others? My brothers, sisters, and cousins and their families? What of my middle mother and my youngest mother? And what of you, father?" "They must all go, but in different parties and different directions. Each group is better off alone. Your mothers will take their own children. As for me, I am staying here. For I myself, I have no fear of the sickness, and I shall not be sick. Do not be concerned for me, my daughter." When Echo came in to tell Waterlily, she repeated what her sister-in-law knew already and was planning for. Echo told her not to bother about a teepee. Her travel tent was big enough for the 5 adults in the party, herself and her husband, Waterlily and Sacred Horse and the mother. Echo's 4 children would fit in wherever they could. She would of course keep the baby with her. Robin could stay with her grandmother, and the lad of 9, whom they were called Little Bear, could occupy a small space with his younger brother, who was Robin's twin. "We can leave our home teepee standing, and our things just as they are," Echo went on. "Close your entryway and tie down the door flap against stray dogs. Everything will be safe then. Your father-in-law is staying, and he will look after our teepees and weight them down in case of storms or high wind. If my brother returns tonight, tell him at once that we leave at dawn. He should get home tonight. He has been gone 2 nights and 3 days already." "Yes, I shall tell him first thing," Waterlily said. This was for something to reply. To herself, she was making rapid calculations on what to take. Around midnight, Sacred Horse did come in. When Waterlily awakened, she heard him sighing from weariness. She could tell from his movements that he sat smoking in the honor place. Her first impulse was to ask about his trip and tell him of her urgent plans to run away in the morning, but something checked her. This was no time to question him. She must wait until he volunteered to talk. Her own mother's wisdom in all wifely conduct was her guide. Bluebird never chatted idly on when Rainbow first got home. In a matter-of-fact way, she always went about making him comfortable and providing a meal for him, speaking only if he asked a question of her, and then briefly. Not that she feared him, not that he was domineering, but she sensed when not to get in his way. When he was tired, let him be. Once she silenced the eager Ohio when he began flooding his father with questions. "Son, remember this," she told him then. "When a man toils all day for his family and comes home tired out, he does not feel like talking at once. Wait until your father is rested and his hunger satisfied, and then maybe he will tell you things." Remembering that advice, Waterlily sat up slowly and said aloud to herself, "He is back. I must get him something to eat." So she did not oblige him to answer, but when she started up her fire in the middle of the teepee, working easily from where she was, he said, "No, don't cook anything for me. Just some broth, if any remains in the kettle." He sipped it slowly, drawing it in audibly at each sip, as though it were an effort. He had ridden about rest all the day. When he finished the broth, he told her about his trip and gave her the presents that his distant relatives had sent to her. "And now for some sleep," he said. "I am completely exhausted." And only then did Waterlily tell him the news. "There is something you must hear first, something your sister said to tell you as soon as you returned." She proceeded to relate everything that had happened since the night they had went visiting together, when a few people died, and now more and more were sick. Many had died, and more were dying, she said. He listened without comment, and she went on. "My father-in-law has ordered us to scatter in small groups and stay out, away from other people. We are to form one party, for your sister and her family and your mother." "Very well. When do we start?" "As soon as it is light enough to see. We are setting out, and I think it will be well if the horses we need were to stand ready outside." "Do you think right? You think right." And then he began planning aloud. "2 horses, more would be a bother. 1 is not enough. The bay can carry the drag with the things we need. You will ride it. The sorrel for me. He is fast, and I can move on him quickly if necessary." "Yes, the bay and the sorrel." So saying, and suddenly unmindful of his weariness, he went swiftly back out into the night.